Welcome to the System Simplified podcast, where we feature top leaders who share stories on how to successfully systemize a business. Now, let's get started with the show. Hello, Adi Klevit here with the System Simplified podcast, where we feature top founders, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders about systematizing a business. And this podcast is being brought to you by Business Success Consulting Group, where we document processes and procedures and create management systems so businesses can grow and thrive. And today's guest is Ari Meisel, the founder of Less Doing and the author of On Productivity and the Replaceable founder. Hello, Ari.
Hi, Adi. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being a guest. And you are coming to us straight from New York City. We can see the city in the background. That's amazing.
Yep, that's right.
Awesome. So, Ari, you are the productivity guru. You make the founders replaceable. That's basically the dream of every founder, right? It's like freedom, having the freedom to do what they want to do. And that's why founders really start a business, right? They think they can be free, but then they become a slave to the business. And you found the formula on how to be able to free them and make them replaceable. And you have a great story about how you started with that, like how it all came about. And I would love for you to share the story with our listeners.
Yeah, sure. So when I was much younger, when I was 23, I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease. So I'd been working in construction in a big real estate development project, very sort of stressful environment, and not taking particularly good care of my health. And I got diagnosed with this chronic illness that affects the digestive tract. It's considered to be incurable. It's very painful. And long story short, I was actually able to overcome the illness. But the big impact was that I went from working 18 hours a day to barely being able to work an hour a day. And it created such an interesting constriction of my time that it forced me to innovate and create a brand new system of productivity, which at the time I dubbed Less Doing. And that question of sort of like, what would you do if you only had an hour a day is such a strong driver in sort of everything I do. And process is certainly a big part of that, right? Because at some point you have to ask yourself, if you only had an hour, it's not really a question at that point of what would you do? It's more about what you wouldn't do. And if there's things that you wouldn't do, but they still need to get done, then who or what is going to do them for you? And process makes that a lot more manageable.
For sure. So then you started Less Doing. I mean, you dubbed it Less Doing. You created that system. And you've been helping entrepreneurs for several years, right? Since that time that you started it. A decade. Amazing. And you told me the story before the interview. You just started all over again, reinvented yourself, and it's just not a problem for you to do that because you have a workable system. So tell us about your system. Like, what are the main components of the systems you develop?
So Less Doing was much more focused on the personal productivity side of things. And at some point that sort of morphed into the more business focused on, which is the replaceable founder. So the main idea is that we want to make everybody in the business, founder included, as replaceable as possible. We don't want to replace them, but we want to make them replaceable, which means that we need systems, processes, automations, delegation, whatever it might take to make that possible. And there's three main areas that we look at in most businesses. That's communications, project management, and then processes. Communications makes up the bulk of it because most people and many leaders are just not effective communicators. And it's not even about the words you use necessarily or the tone. It's really about the structure and the clarity in terms of conveying success. So communication is a really, really big part of it. And we look at how you manage your inbox, which is not an actual email problem. There's a lot of psychology goes into that. How you communicate asynchronously, right? So the opposite of what we're doing right now, rather than synchronous. And then how you delegate really effectively and the different levels within that. So that's under communication, but then there's project management processes.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about the communication. So you said it's the opposite of what we are communicating right now. So what is your favorite tool of communicating so we don't have to have that face-to-face communication?
So hands down, that's going to be Voxer. But I do want to point out to people that technology is never going to solve your problems. You need to have good habits and good structure first. And that sounds harder and less fun, and it is in some cases, but that's ultimately what's going to make this sustainable, because technology will amplify habits, right? And if you have good habits, it's going to make them better. If you have bad habits, it will make them much worse, much faster. So Voxer is a really interesting voice communication tool, not completely dissimilar to things like WhatsApp or iMessage, but it has a few very unique features that only it has. And one of which is that it allows you to communicate both synchronously and asynchronously. So if you're talking, somebody can listen while you're talking. And if they're not there, then they can listen later. And you can really, I have really stretched the limits of what you can do asynchronously. So
and let's explain if in case our listeners are not completely sure what is asynchronously, let's explain to them.
It just means not live, right? So like Adi and I are talking right now, I can talk, she can make a facial expression and respond, and vice versa. Asynchronous is the opposite, right? Asynchronous is I send a message, voice, text, whatever it might be, and you listen to it or receive it when you want to, and then you respond when you want to. If you want a really like old school image, think about like the person playing chess in America over ham radio with somebody in Russia. Like today I move this, and then okay, tomorrow I move this, and you could go on months that way. We don't necessarily want that in the conversation, but it's not live. And what that ultimately says, if you do it right, is that you're going to be communicating at your best, because it's just path of least resistance essentially. Plus, it's very unusual, I'd say highly unlikely, that you'll find any two people whose schedules match up with each other. So if you want to have the 9 a.m. status meeting with your team, odds are most people are just not going to be good 9 a.m. status update meeting type of people. So we actually do, with the companies that I work with, they'll do asynchronous daily stand-ups, and they'll use Voxer. So it'll pop up message, say, hey, everybody, it's time to check in. And then over the course of 2, 3, 4, 5 hours, everybody can check in at their best time, and it keeps it very fluid, and you just get people working better. And in terms of like coaching, rather than having so the people that I work with, it's exclusively over Voxer. They can Vox me whenever they want about whatever they want. So instead of somebody having to wait 3 days for our Wednesday noon meeting for 45 minutes to get the 3-minute answer that they need, on Sunday at 11 o'clock at night, they can say like, hey, I just had this situation. I'm really annoyed about this person. What should I do? And then I respond. So asynchronous communication is the #1 productivity weapon, in my opinion. And a lot of the reason we don't do it is just culture and like old habits. The idea that you've got to be, face to face with the client, shake hands, all that kind of stuff. I do sales over Voxer. I do coaching over Voxer. It's a game changer.
We absolutely, we work on several projects together, and we never met and never actually talked synchronously until now, because we talk over Voxer, and I feel like I know you so well, and it's amazing how it works. But it was like, basically, if we will take all the minutes that we have talked together, probably will be like about less than half an hour probably, but it was like boom, boom, fast, move back and forth. It probably not everybody will, it's not a style for everyone, but again, it's not probably what everyone wants to do with their business. So it works great for those founders that want to go with that direction with the business and be replaceable. But you said something very interesting. You said that it's not necessarily that you are going to replace yourself out of the business. You're just not going to be in the day-to-day operation, right? Because I know many founders that founded the business, but they like being in the business. They like, or working on the business, right? If we use the E-Myth words. So they like working on the business. They just don't get to work on the business. So they don't necessarily want to totally replace themselves, but it's basically replacing themselves out of the day-to-day work, right? So in your experience, what do founders want to replace themselves out of?
So it's a really important distinction to make. There's nothing inherently wrong with a founder being involved in the day-to-day operations. The problem is if they have to be involved, right? So, or more realistically, if they're not involved, does the business halt or grind to a halt, or do things break? And pie in the sky, which I've been able to achieve with lots and lots of clients, companies I've worked with, if the owner or the business founder, whatever, is not around, can the business continue to grow? And that's a lot harder for people to sort of understand. And there's a whole ego thing that goes with that too, because then it's like, well, why do they need? If they don't need me, what are they? What am I doing? But that's something that we work on too. So this is the way that I usually break it down for people, is that there's a big difference between firefighting and fireproofing, right? And so everyone loves, well, they don't want to admit it, but everyone loves being a firefighter, right? They love when a business owner will simultaneously be like, oh God, it's so annoying. Like my director of sales, whatever, called me in the middle of a meeting, freaked out because something was happening with his client, and I had to go in and like save the deal. It's like, yeah, okay, you're complaining, but you also really love it because you felt needed and you were able to swoop in and save the situation and get your esteem and all those needs met. Fireproofing is a lot less sexy, right? It's not as fun to be like, well, okay, I'm going to put systems in place now that we may never need, but we probably do. And I'm going to, spend time building this tool rather than like closing the deal. But that's ultimately what makes the business sustainable and makes it so that you're not owned by the business at some point. Because you mentioned freedom before, and freedom is a really interesting double-edged sword for a lot of people. There's two kinds of freedom, positive and negative. And actually, it's called the liberty paradox for most people. So most people, when they think about freedom, they're actually looking for freedom from something, right? So freedom from the 9 to 5, if they're not an entrepreneur, or freedom from the debt, or freedom from the bad partnership. But it's always this freedom from thing. What we really want, and what I help clients achieve, is freedom to, right? So the freedom to take on new projects, the freedom to leave if they want, and come back at some point and contribute all the wonderful things that they experienced while they were away from the business. So freedom is a trap if you don't understand how you're approaching it.
That's so true. That's so true. We did a survey on business owners, like what do you like most about being a business owner? And it's really the number one word that came up with is freedom, but then they feel trapped. So I totally agree. And having those systems in place create enough boundaries and enough knowledge for everyone what to expect, that then you can extract yourself out of the business and come back and do what you want, like take a look at what you want to do and really define what it is. And you're right, it is also a state of mind in terms of the ego. The ego is not, or whatever, however you want to call it, in terms of like, oh, now I'm not needed, which, by the way, can also be experienced by employees. Because, what we do is we document the processes and procedures and create basically the training manuals that are needed in order to continue without having that, if something happens to that person. But people don't want to just do it sometimes because they feel like they're irreplaceable. But the truth is that they're not. They are less irreplaceable because it's very transparent what they do. And then if you're really good at what you do, why not continue doing it? But you have the choice. And that's, I think, what I really like what you said in terms of it's the difference between having and willing. So do you have to be in your business every single day and do the day-to-day actions? Or are you willing or you want to? And then it's okay because it's your choice. So I think you're really introducing the choice part here about when you're a business owner, what do you want to do? Do you want to be working in the business, on the business, or just being even outside the business and let the business run without you? So that's really cool. So let's talk a little bit. So we talked about communication, there is automation, there is processes. So what are the main benefits of having well-documented or well-defined processes in a business that you've seen?
Yeah, so one of the most obvious ones, right, is like if you don't document it, you don't necessarily know how it's happening. And there's a few issues that come to that. So if you don't know how a process works, then the obvious one is, right, well, if something breaks, like you don't know how to fix it, and then you got to figure it out. But the other one is that there are so many inherent inefficiencies in everything that everybody does. But they do them, and they might do them for months or years, and it gets really easy and really automatic. But we're robbing ourselves of the opportunity to fix those inefficiencies if we don't identify what's actually in the process. I had a professor in college who used to say, like, don't be irreplaceable, because if you can't be replaced, you can't be promoted, right? And so people will hold on to these processes in their heads. They keep them very opaque because, one, it's like, well, there's a few things that come up there too. One is like, it's too much of a pain to explain this to somebody. It's like, well, then you don't really know the process, then you're just kind of doing it. very autonomically. And if it's not requiring sort of higher level human thought, then it probably could be done by an automation or some sort of other system or somebody with less skill than you. Because what we're trying to do here is replace people up, not out. And what they have to accept is that if they don't have to do this stuff, all these processes, then they can do other more interesting things and use their skills. Why would we get rid of somebody who has those skills when we're removing the weights from their legs in some ways? So and then the other thing is that if we do need to scale, we do need to expand, we can't have somebody just sitting and teaching somebody every time. In fact, you and I have a mutual client who, one of their training processes, they literally had like a manager sitting with somebody for months and just being like, now do this, and then you have to do this and do that. And like, that's not sustainable.
Absolutely. I agree 100%. So you wrote the book on productivity and you wrote the Replaceable owner, so Replaceable founder, right? So you have that's on Amazon, and then now you have the on productivity. Is that on Amazon as well?
Yes, and the audiobook actually just came out a few days ago, which
Great.
I read.
Awesome. Yeah, absolutely. So definitely encourage our listeners to go check it out. It's On Productivity and the Replaceable Owner by Ari Meisel. So tell us a little bit about the On Productivity. What are the main things that you cover in that book?
So On Productivity, I think it's my 12th book. And so it's sort of meant to be like the final book on productivity. I don't expect to write another book on productivity. You never know. But it's really sort of a culmination of all the experience now that I've had working with companies of every size in every industry, and really trying to boil it down to something pretty condensed and straightforward in terms of how you look at your communication project manager processes. But I tried really hard to, like, I only mentioned, I think, 3 or 4 pieces of software in it. Like, I really wanted to make this sort of a timeless one that people could look at 5 or 10 years, and it really could help inform their productivity.
That's excellent. Yeah, it's like technology changes, but like you said, if you have the infrastructure and you understand what you're using technology for, then you can keep yourself up to date with the technology that exists out there. But you have to, first of all, figure out what you need it for and what's the purpose of it. And obviously not be too technology happy in terms of like, basically jump on every new software that comes out, right? Mm-hmm. I'm sure you experienced that as well, and you've seen it.
All the time. In fact, I was talking to my uncle the other day, who's a lawyer, and he was like, so, what's the, the newest like productivity tool? And I was like, that's really the wrong question. Like, we don't want to find a tool just because it exists to like solve a problem that you just created for it.
That's absolutely true.
If you have a need, we'll find the software.
For sure. And that's the right way to do it. Ari, I don't know if a lot of people know that about you, but you shared with me that you also volunteer as an EMT, which is amazing and tells a lot about you and who you are as a person. Because from knowing you now, I probably know you over a year, and you care about your clients. You care about making this a better world. And that's really what I feel like why you're doing it for entrepreneurs, is to help. I mean, yes, you are doing now the consulting via Voxer, which makes it simpler. And again, just for our listeners, if you don't, check out Voxer so you know what it is. It's basically a way, it's like a walkie-talkie, right? It's a way to talk back and forth. But the cool thing is that you don't have to do it while the other person is there. You can leave a message and then they listen to it. So for you to be open for clients 24/7 on Voxer, it's pretty amazing. I know you don't have to pick it up 24/7, but you're there and you will respond very fast. So I really admire you for volunteering as an EMT, and you have 4 kids, right?
Yep, 4 young children.
4 young children, and that's why you're right now en route, because you just dropped them off at school, and now you're en route back to your home office, etc. So tell us about you. Why are you volunteering as an EMT? What's your why behind it?
So I think it's the same reason about the coaching, honestly. Like, I just like working with people and finding, like, discovering problems and solving them. And it's something that I've just been passionate about for a long time. I've been an EMT for about as long as I actually have had the company. So I started that about 10 years ago also. And there's always something new. there's an interesting camaraderie that I always find that comes along with it when you're working with people who are in that space. But I don't know. I love it. I really love it. And I also, I think I compartmentalize very well. So I handle those situations better than some people that I've met, which is just, I'm fortunate in that way. And so it works out really well. And also it keeps me humble, I would say, because you don't really get a lot of opportunities to like shine as an EMT, even if you're saving someone's life. Like nobody knows your name. Like it's not one of those things where you're getting a lot of exposure for it. So I think it's a really good balance for me.
That's beautiful. I mean, it is a great example again of being able to live the lifestyle that you want, run a successful company, give back to the community. So you definitely, when you teach people, you know what you're teaching because you're living that particular, you're living what you are teaching, which is pretty remarkable. So thank you for everything that you're doing. And I would like to encourage our listeners to check out your books on Amazon. So go to Amazon and type in Ari Meisel and the books there on productivity. I'm really curious what will be the 13th book. If it's not going to be on productivity, what is it going to be on?
I can tell you, it was probably going to be on the history of the oldest companies, which I know is like totally seems like a departure, but it's this sort of fascination of mine.
I love it because I'm a firm believer that you have to go to the roots as well to really understand, because you sometimes find the fundamentals there. So I think it's smart to do that. So that will be the 13th book, and we're going to look for that. And of course, people can connect with you on LinkedIn. You're on all the social media. Look for Ari Meisel, Less Doing, the Replaceable founder. And I'm sure they can find you and be able to connect with you and find all those good knowledge that you put out there. So in closing, Ari, what would be your advice, your most common advice that you give to founders?
So the system is optimize, automate, outsource. That's what Less Doing is originally about. And that optimize thing is the first part. So you really just have to look at how you're doing what you do now. And that sounds very simple and like oversimplified in some ways, but we don't do it. Everyone gets overwhelmed. They just don't do it. So take any process in your business right now and look at it and try to actually write out every step involved to the point that somebody else could actually do it. And I think you might be surprised what you find.
That's great. Thank you so much. And thank you for being a guest on this podcast.
Thanks, Adi. Always nice to talk to you.
Great. Thank you, Ari.
Thanks for listening to the System Simplified podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.